When my boyfriend's first love returned home, he publicly fired me. That afternoon, I interviewed at a rival company. The CEO stared at my resume in shock, then suddenly called his father to say, "Dad, cancel my blind date. I found your daughter-in-law today." My name is Madeline, and I am 33 years old. I never expected my 4-year relationship and my career to implode in the exact same breath. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to someone who took your hard work and loyalty for granted. The warning signs had been accumulating for weeks. Subtle shifts in Cameron's behavior that I had initially brushed off as stress. He was guarding his phone, changing his passwords, and arriving home smelling faintly of an expensive floral perfume that I did not wear. I knew something was wrong, which prompted me to quietly reach out to industry contacts earlier that week, securing a fallback plan just in case the worst happened. But nothing could have prepared me for the sheer cruelty of his execution. The morning sun was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our downtown Chicago headquarters, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany of the boardroom table. I sat in my usual chair to the right of the head seat, a thick stack of quarterly projections resting under my hands. The entire executive team was gathered for what was supposed to be a routine strategic planning meeting. The atmosphere in the room was charged with a strange, nervous energy that made my skin prickle. Department heads refused to meet my eyes, whispering in hushed tones that ceased the moment I looked their way. Then the heavy glass doors swung open. Cameron walked into the room wearing the custom Italian suit I had bought for his 32nd birthday. But he was not alone. His fingers were tightly intertwined with those of a stunning blonde woman. Her name was Savannah. I recognized her instantly from the torn photographs I had helped Cameron throw away 4 years ago. She was his college sweetheart, the woman who had shattered his heart and left him for a wealthy heir just as Cameron was struggling to pay his rent. Now she was back, wearing a smug smile and a designer dress that cost more than our initial startup budget. Cameron did not even glance in my direction as he took his place at the head of the table, pulling Savannah into the chair directly beside him. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie with his free hand, projecting an air of absolute authority that I had painstakingly helped him cultivate. Effective immediately, Madeline is stepping down from her role as Chief Operations Officer, he announced. His voice echoed off the glass walls, loud and unyielding in the silent room. Savannah will be taking over. We need someone with true sophisticated vision to take this company public. I sat completely frozen. My pen hovered over my notepad, the ink bleeding into the paper as the reality of his words crashed over me. I had spent the last 4 years of my life building this company from a chaotic garage project into a recognized industry contender. I had worked 80-hour weeks without a single complaint. I had skipped holidays with my family to troubleshoot server crashes and handle client emergencies. I had personally secured every major account on our roster, while Cameron focused on networking and socializing at expensive luncheons. I had poured my heart, my life savings, and my absolute loyalty into both the company and the man sitting across from me. And now, he was firing me in front of the entire staff, simply to impress the woman who had once discarded him like trash. A heavy, suffocating silence draped over the boardroom. The department heads I had personally hired and trained stared at their laps, suddenly finding the wood grain of the table utterly fascinating. No one spoke up. No one defended the woman who had signed their paychecks when funding was perilously tight. The betrayal stung deeply, a sharp physical ache in my chest, but it also crystallized my focus. I refused to give Cameron or Savannah the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I placed my pen down with deliberate slowness. The soft click seemed to echo like a gunshot. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored skirt. I kept my posture straight and my voice dangerously level, stripping away any trace of the heartbreak threatening to consume me. Cameron, You cannot unilaterally fire your co-founder, I said. My gaze locked onto his, forcing him to acknowledge me. I built this operations department from scratch. I created the infrastructure that makes this entire business function. You know as well as I do that you cannot run this ship without me. Before Cameron could muster a response, Savannah stood up. She let out a soft, condescending laugh and flipped her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder, looking at me with pure disdain. Actually, Madeline, Cameron owns 60% of the shares, she said, her tone dripping with artificial sweetness. You only own 40. He has executive control, which means he can do whatever he deems necessary for the future of his company. She leaned across the table, her eyes glinting with a triumphant malice. Security is waiting outside to escort you to the parking lot. We cannot risk a disgruntled former employee tampering with sensitive data. Please leave your keycard on the desk and gather your personal items quickly. I looked from Savannah to Cameron. The man I had loved, the man I had sacrificed my own youth and comfort to elevate, refused to meet my eyes. He stared at his expensive watch, waiting for me to comply like a common subordinate. I thought about the countless nights I had stayed awake drafting our first business plan while he slept. I thought about the massive personal loans I had taken out under my own name because his credit was entirely ruined from his reckless spending in his 20s. I had been the shield that protected him from his own incompetence. Savannah did not know that she was inheriting a throne built entirely by my hands and my financial sacrifice. She saw the prestige, the glossy office, and the impressive title, completely blind to the foundation holding it all up. I did not cry. I refused to shed a single tear in front of people who placed so little value on my dedication. The urge to scream, to hurl the heavy mahogany chair across the room burned hot in my chest, but I pushed it down deep inside. Anger without a calculated strategy was entirely useless. I reached up and unclipped the corporate lanyard from my collar. I placed my keycard in the center of the table, laying it deliberately right over my meticulously prepared quarterly projections. Then, I picked up my handbag and walked toward the glass doors. I did not look back. I kept my shoulders squared and my chin held high, projecting a calm confidence I had to force myself to feel. As I stepped out of the boardroom, 2 burly security guards immediately flanked me. They escorted me down the long hallway, past the rows of cubicles where employees quickly averted their eyes, pretending to be absorbed in their monitors. The public walk of shame was clearly designed to break my spirit, to make me feel small, discarded, and utterly defeated. But as I stepped into the elevator, and the stainless steel doors slid closed, shutting out the company I had built with my own blood and sweat, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. I pulled my phone from my purse. My hands were shaking slightly from the residual adrenaline, but my mind was razor sharp. I opened my email and read the confirmation message sitting at the very top of my inbox. It was an interview appointment I had secured just a few hours prior, having trusted my intuition when Cameron first started pulling away. The appointment was scheduled for this exact afternoon, and the interview was with Zenith Technologies, our biggest, most aggressive industry rival. I slipped my phone back into my bag and took a deep, steadying breath as the elevator descended to the ground floor parking garage. Cameron thought he had just won the ultimate victory by discarding me to impress his first love. He did not realize he had just handed his greatest weapon directly to his sworn enemy. The war had just begun. The elevator descent felt like the longest 60 seconds of my life. I stared at the steel doors, watching my blurred reflection. The 2 security guards stood silently behind me. They were men I had personally vetted, men whose bonuses I had approved just months ago. Now they treated me like a corporate spy. The doors slid open, revealing the expansive lobby I had meticulously designed. I took in the polished marble floors and the massive living moss wall. I had spent countless weekends agonizing over every detail of this space, ensuring it projected the exact image of innovation we needed. Now I was being marched out like a criminal. I stepped out of the elevator. The receptionist, a young woman I had mentored, looked down at her keyboard, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Resting on the edge of her desk was a cardboard box containing personal items from my office. Cameron must have instructed his assistant to pack it while the board meeting was underway, an insult designed to rush my departure. I picked up the box, ready to walk through the glass doors and leave this environment behind forever. Before I could take another step, a tall figure moved to block my path. It was Greg, the lead board member. He was a man in his 50s with perfectly styled silver hair and an air of unearned superiority. Cameron had insisted on bringing him onto the board, arguing he possessed the networking skills we needed to secure larger funding rounds. I had opposed the decision, recognizing Greg as an empty suit who cared only about optics and profit margins. Today, that mistake came back to haunt me. Greg stood between me and the exit, blocking the natural light. He smirked, adjusting the knot of his expensive silk tie. His eyes swept over me with smug satisfaction. "Do not make a scene, Madeline," he said, his voice lowering to a patronizing murmur. "A refresh in leadership is exactly what this company needs. Savannah has high society connections. She brings a pedigree to the table that investors respond to. You were great for the startup phase, but let us be honest. You were just the workhorse. We need a show horse to take this to the next level." The sheer audacity of his words sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. The security guards shifted nervously behind me. I did not yell. I did not drop my box or cause the scene Greg was eager to witness. Instead, I tightened my grip on the cardboard edges, leaned in, and let the cold truth slice through his arrogant facade. "A refresh?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I suppose Cameron forgot to mention the reality of our startup phase during his lavish dinner meetings with you. He forgot to mention he spent the first 2 years of this company buried in credit card debt because he could not manage a basic budget. When the initial seed money ran out, it was my personal savings that kept the servers running. I paid the hosting fees out of my own pocket, while Cameron was finding himself on a golf course. Greg blinked, his smug expression faltering slightly. "And those high society connections you value so highly?" I pressed on. "They did not secure our enterprise contracts. I did. I spent 6 months negotiating the Mitchell account, running on zero sleep, while Cameron took credit for my operational models. Savannah might have a pedigree, but she does not know the first thing about running a tech infrastructure. You just handed the keys of a sports car to someone who does not possess a license." A deep red flush crept up Greg's neck. His ego, entirely dependent on the illusion of his own business acumen, was visibly bruised. He prided himself on making ruthless decisions, and I had just exposed him as a gullible fool manipulated by a mediocre man's charm. "Take your box and get out." Greg snapped, his voice, dropping into a harsh snarl. "You can spin the past however you want to make yourself feel better, but the reality is, you were always just a placeholder. Cameron used you to build the foundation, and now we have outgrown you. Goodbye, Madeline." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the revolving doors. I did not give him the satisfaction of a response. I had spoken my piece, and I knew my words would echo in his mind the moment Savannah fumbled her first major operational crisis. I walked past him, my head held high, and pushed through the heavy glass doors into the crisp morning air. The transition from the sterile lobby to the vibrant energy of the downtown streets felt like waking up from a suffocating dream. The noise of the city, the honking taxis, and the rushing pedestrians grounded me. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp air. I felt a profound sense of liberation. The heavy burden of carrying Cameron's inadequacies had been completely lifted from my shoulders. I walked briskly toward the adjacent parking garage, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the concrete pavement. The security guards had stopped at the building's entrance, finally releasing me from their watchful custody. I navigated the familiar rows of parked cars until I reached my vehicle. I unlocked the trunk, placed the cardboard box inside, and slammed the lid with a satisfying thud. It was a physical punctuation mark on the end of an exhausting chapter of my life. As I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, silence enveloped me. For a fleeting moment, the magnitude of what had just occurred threatened to overwhelm my carefully maintained composure. I had lost my relationship, my income, and my company in the span of 30 minutes. But before the panic could fully take root, a sharp buzz broke the quiet of the car's interior. I reached in and pulled my cell phone out of my handbag. The screen lit with a new notification. It was an email, and the sender address made my heart race with fierce anticipation. The message was from the executive assistant at Zenith Technologies, our biggest and most formidable industry rival. It was the company Cameron had spent years obsessively trying to outpace the white whale he could never quite catch. I opened the email, my eyes scanning the professional text. The assistant was reaching out to formally confirm my urgent afternoon meeting. I had sent a discreet inquiry to their recruitment team late last night, banking on my industry reputation to secure a quiet conversation. I had not expected such a rapid, definitive response. Zenith Technologies did not just want a casual phone screening. The email explicitly confirmed a closed-door appointment with their notorious chief executive officer. A genuine smile spread across my face as I read the final line, confirming the time and location. The sadness and betrayal lingering at the edges of my mind were entirely eclipsed by a surging wave of vindication. Cameron and his enabling board members thought they had buried me today. They thought they had stripped me of my power and cast me out into the professional wilderness. They had no idea they had simply freed me to join forces with the entity capable of destroying them completely. I started the engine, the low hum of the motor matching the relentless drive pulsing through my veins. The initial battle was over, but the actual war had just begun. The drive across downtown Chicago took exactly 20 minutes. The shock of the morning had burned off, leaving behind a cold, sharp determination. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the Zenith Technologies headquarters. Unlike the exposed brick startup aesthetic Cameron favored, the Zenith building was a monolith of dark glass and brushed steel. It was an absolute fortress of corporate power. I parked my car, checked my reflection, and stepped out. I walked toward the private executive elevators, my heels clicking against the pristine concrete. Every step I took felt like a physical separation from the woman I had been just an hour ago. I was a free agent, holding the architectural blueprints to an entire industry segment in my mind. The security desk in the main lobby was intimidating. The head guard typed my name into his terminal, and his demeanor instantly shifted to utmost respect. He handed me a temporary access badge, directing me to a dedicated express elevator. The car shot upward, depositing me directly onto the top floor. The executive suite at Zenith was a masterclass in psychological intimidation and understated wealth. An impeccably dressed executive assistant stood up the moment the doors parted. She greeted me pleasantly by name and respectfully informed me that the chief executive officer was expecting me. She led me down a long, quiet corridor lined with frosted glass walls. I took a deep breath, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. The assistant opened a set of heavy, solid oak doors and stepped aside to let me enter. Harrison's office was massive, dominating the corner of the building, with panoramic views of the city skyline. My attention was drawn away from the view and locked onto the man sitting behind the sprawling custom desk. Harrison was 35 years old and already an absolute legend in the tech sector. He had a reputation for being ruthless, brilliant, and notoriously impossible to impress. He was wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit without a tie. His piercing, analytical gray eyes were fixed entirely on me as I walked across the plush carpet. He did not stand up immediately. He simply watched my approach, assessing my posture, my confidence, and my presence. I took the open seat across from him, without waiting for a formal invitation. I placed my leather portfolio on his desk, folding my hands over it. Harrison leaned forward, picking up the single sheet of premium paper resting in the center of his empty desk. It was my resume, though we both knew it was merely a formality. We operated in highly competitive circles and had studied each other's market moves for years. He read over the document in silence for an agonizing minute. The tension in the quiet office stretched tight, but I did not break eye contact. I simply waited, projecting the quiet authority of a woman who fully understood her own immense value. Finally, Harrison set the paper down. He leaned back deeply in his high-backed leather executive chair. His gray eyes narrowed slightly as a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "You are Madeline?" he stated, his voice a rich, resonant baritone that carried a hint of genuine amusement. "The Madeline." "I am," I replied very smoothly, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "And I am looking for a new home for my talents." Harrison let out a low chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "Cameron is an absolute fool," he said, his voice dripping with unmistakable contempt for my former partner. "Everyone in the elite executive circles knows he is just a figurehead. He is a charismatic salesman who stumbled into a gold mine. We all knew you were the actual architect of his entire infrastructure. We have watched you scale that company while he took the magazine cover photos." The intense validation hit me like a powerful physical wave. For 4 long years I had labored in the shadows, believing my sacrifices were entirely unseen. To hear the most feared CEO in our market acknowledge my worth so casually, so absolutely, was incredibly intoxicating. "If you knew I was the architect," I countered, "why did you never try to poach me before today?" Harrison tilted his head, his smile deepening into something far more predatory. "Because loyalty is the rarest commodity in business, Madeline. You were fiercely loyal to a man who did not deserve you. I knew any attempt to buy you away with a better salary would be immediately rejected. I simply had to wait for Cameron's monumental ego to push you out the door. When my assistant told me you requested a meeting this morning, I cleared my entire afternoon schedule." I knew the breaking point had finally arrived. I leaned forward slightly, matching his intense energy. "The breaking point arrived exactly 2 hours ago. He terminated my position in front of the board to install a woman with 0 operational experience. I am now a free agent, Harrison, and I know every single weakness, every structural flaw, and every client vulnerability in his entire network." Harrison's eyes darkened with raw, predatory interest. The professional chemistry crackling between us was undeniable. It was the thrill of 2 apex predators recognizing a shared appetite for absolute conquest. He opened his mouth to speak, likely to offer me the world on a silver platter. But before he could utter a single professional word, the sharp, jarring ring of a cell phone shattered the highly charged silence in the room. It was Harrison's private phone, resting on the far corner of his desk. He glanced at the caller ID, an expression of mild annoyance crossing his handsome features. He reached his arm out and pressed the button to answer it deliberately, putting the call on speakerphone rather than taking it privately. He wanted me to see exactly how he operated, with absolute transparency and 0 hesitation. A booming, authoritative voice echoed through the spacious office before Harrison even had a chance to say a word of greeting. "Harrison, you better not be bailing on the blind date I set up for you tonight," the man demanded loudly. It was clearly his father demanding respect. "I have already confirmed the reservation at the steakhouse. The woman comes from an excellent family. She is educated, ambitious, and she will not put up with your usual workaholic excuses. You need to settle down and find someone who can keep up with you. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on my portfolio. I kept my face entirely neutral, though a flicker of amusement danced in my chest. To be sitting in the middle of a corporate negotiation while the ruthless CEO was being scolded by his father over a blind date was a surreal contrast. Harrison did not look at the phone. He did not break eye contact with me for a single second. The intensity of his gray gaze locked onto mine, burning with a sudden, audacious clarity that made the breath catch in my throat. He rested his hands flat on the desk, leaning closer to me as he spoke toward the device. "Dad, cancel the blind date," Harrison said, his voice steady, carrying a note of absolute finality. There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end of the line. "What are you talking about?" his father demanded, completely shocked by the refusal. "I spent exactly 3 weeks arranging this. You cannot just cancel." "I am not going," Harrison replied smoothly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I found your daughter-in-law today." The absolute silence that followed Harrison's declaration was heavy enough to have its own gravitational pull. I sat perfectly still in my chair, processing the sheer audacity of what had just occurred. Harrison had not muted the phone. He had not lowered his voice. He had delivered the statement with the calm, unshakable certainty of a man who was entirely used to bending the world to his exact specifications. On the other end of the line, his father let out a sharp bark of surprised laughter before the call disconnected with a sudden click. Harrison set his phone back down on the pristine surface of his desk, his gray eyes returning to mine with a look of intense, unapologetic appraisal. He did not offer a rushed explanation or backpedal to make the moment less charged. He simply watched me, waiting to see if I possessed the fortitude to match his relentless pace. I felt a flush of heat rise to my cheeks, but I kept my posture impeccably straight. The professional boundaries of this interview had just been obliterated, replaced by a dynamic that was entirely thrilling and incredibly dangerous. I opened my mouth to respond, ready to demand exactly what he meant by claiming me as his future wife within 5 minutes of our introduction. I wanted to challenge his arrogance, to establish that I was not a prize to be won, or a convenient excuse to escape a family obligation. But before a single syllable could pass my lips, the sharp, vibrating buzz of my own cell phone shattered the tension in the room. I glanced down at my handbag resting beside my portfolio. The glowing screen illuminated the dark leather interior, displaying a name I had hoped to never see again. It was Cameron. The timing was almost poetic. It had barely been an hour since he had marched me out of my own company in front of the entire executive board, humiliating me to elevate Savannah. Now he was calling me with an urgency that caused my phone to vibrate continuously against the desk. I looked up at Harrison. His gaze had shifted to my bag, his sharp mind immediately calculating the significance of the interruption. He raised a single questioning eyebrow, silently offering me the floor. A cold wave of satisfaction washed over me. I reached into my bag and pulled out the phone. I did not decline the call, and I did not answer it privately. I pressed the green button, tapped the speaker icon, and placed the device squarely in the center of Harrison's massive desk. The audio connected with a soft chime broadcasting the ensuing chaos into the quiet sanctuary of the executive suite. Cameron did not even bother with a greeting. He bypassed any pretense of professionalism or basic human decency, launching immediately into a frantic, aggressive demand. "Madeline, the master administrative passwords are not working," Cameron barked. His voice was loud, breathless, and laced with a frantic panic that completely betrayed his usual arrogant tone. "I need the bypass keys, right now." "Savannah is trying to access the client database to pull the integration files for the afternoon merger meeting, and the entire system is locked down. Every single terminal is throwing an authentication error. Fix it, right now." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs with slow, deliberate elegance. I glanced at Harrison. He was leaning forward now, his chin resting on his steepled fingers, listening to my former partner unravel with an expression of pure, unadulterated entertainment. "I am sorry, Cameron," I said. My voice was incredibly pleasant, perfectly modulated, and completely devoid of the panic he was desperately trying to induce. "I am afraid I cannot help you with that." "You do not have a choice," Madeline Cameron snapped, the desperation in his voice escalating into outright rage. "The investors need these files in 1 hour. Savannah needs to present the operational roadmap. I know you changed the encryption protocols before the board meeting this morning. You are doing this to be vindictive. Give me the bypass codes immediately, or I will have security come to your apartment." I let a soft, amused sigh escape my lips, ensuring the microphone picked up the sound. "You seem to be confused about the current chain of command, Cameron," I replied, enunciating every word with crystal clarity. "I am no longer an employee. You made that exceptionally clear in front of 50 people this morning when you marched me to the elevator. You terminated my position. Therefore, I no longer have authorized access to the administrative back end, nor do I have any legal obligation to perform technical support for your new chief operations officer. You will have to figure out how to run the company you claim to have built entirely on your own." A high-pitched, furious shriek suddenly erupted in the background of the call. It was Savannah. I could hear the frantic clicking of a keyboard as she presumably tried to force her way into the encrypted servers. "If you do not unlock those files right this second, I will sue you for corporate sabotage," Savannah screamed, her voice shrill and echoing through the speakerphone. "You are intentionally damaging company property. We will have you arrested for digital vandalism. We will destroy your career so thoroughly you will never work in this industry again. You are nothing but a bitter, jealous ex-girlfriend trying to ruin my big day." I looked across the desk at Harrison. He was grinning now, a genuine, dazzling smile that completely transformed his intimidating features. He was witnessing firsthand the absolute incompetence of his competitors, and he was clearly enjoying the show. "Go ahead and sue," I told them, my voice dropping into a low, deadly register that commanded absolute silence on the other end of the line. "Send your lawyers. Send the police. But before you embarrass yourselves in front of a judge, you might want to call your legal department and check the ownership names on those specific server domains." I paused, letting the silence stretch out, allowing the weight of my words to crush their frantic momentum. "You fired the operational architect Cameron. Now you get to watch the foundation collapse. Have a wonderful afternoon." I reached forward and tapped the red button on my screen, severing the connection instantly. The heavy, peaceful silence of the Zenith Technologies executive suite rushed back in, entirely replacing the toxic chaos of my past. I picked up my phone and slipped it back into my handbag, feeling an overwhelming surge of power and liberation. I had officially severed the dead weight. Harrison did not say a single word about the chaotic phone call that had just concluded. He did not need to offer any commentary on my former partner. He unclasped his hands, opened the top drawer of his desk, and pulled out a thick leather document folder. He slid it smoothly across the polished wood until it rested directly in front of me. I looked down at the heavy parchment paper. It was an executive employment contract drawn up and ready for a signature. I read the title printed in bold letters at the top of the page. It did not say Chief Operations Officer. It did not say Vice President. Harrison handed me a heavy gold fountain pen, his gray eyes burning with fierce, undeniable respect. He was offering me a position as co-chief executive officer and equity partner at Zenith Technologies. I picked up the heavy gold fountain pen, feeling the cool metal against my skin. My hand did not tremble as I pressed the nib to the thick parchment paper. I signed my name with a fluid, decisive motion, legally binding myself to the most powerful technology firm in the city. Harrison watched the ink dry with a look of profound satisfaction. He stood up, extended his hand across the desk, and welcomed me to the top of the food chain. The transition was seamless and immediate. By the following morning, I had a corner office just down the hall from Harrison. My new workspace was a stunning expanse of dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows, completely devoid of the chaotic, disorganized energy that had plagued Cameron's startup. I sat at my new desk, breathing in the quiet, focused atmosphere, and immediately got to work. Over the next 2 weeks, I thrived at Zenith Technologies in a way I had never experienced before. I was no longer fighting against a current of incompetence. I was running alongside a visionary who matched my exact pace. Harrison and I spent our days locked in intense strategy sessions, mapping out the systematic dismantling of Cameron's market share. We operated with a synchronized rhythm that felt almost telepathic. I would identify a structural vulnerability in my former company's client retention protocol, and Harrison would instantly deploy the resources to exploit it. We targeted their largest accounts one by one, offering superior infrastructure and unshakable stability. Our approach was methodical and utterly devastating. I knew exactly when Cameron's major contracts were up for renewal, and I knew exactly which technical features his platform consistently failed to deliver. Zenith Technologies swooped in to fill those massive gaps, acquiring 3 of his cornerstone clients before the end of my first week. The professional chemistry between us was undeniable, but as the long workdays bled into late nights, that connection evolved into something deeper. The sprawling office would empty out, leaving just the 2 of us, bathed in the glow of our monitors and the city lights outside. We would order late-night takeout, eating boxes of expensive sushi while reviewing server migration data. During those quiet hours, the strict professional boundaries began to blur. I would catch Harrison watching me when he thought I was focused on a spreadsheet. His intense gray eyes held a genuine romantic tension that made my heart race. He never explicitly brought up the audacious phone call with his father, but the weight of his daughter-in-law comment lingered in the air between us, a silent promise of what was building just beneath the surface. We were 2 incredibly driven people, recognizing a rare, profound equal in each other. While Harrison and I were flourishing Cameron, and Savannah were rapidly drowning in the mess they had created. My sudden departure, combined with the administrative lockdown, had thrown their operations into absolute turmoil. They were losing clients at an alarming rate, and their desperation was beginning to manifest in sloppy, erratic behavior. 14 days into my tenure at Zenith, the inevitable retaliation arrived. Harrison and I were sitting in his office, reviewing a successful quarterly projection, when his executive assistant walked in carrying a thick, certified legal envelope. She handed it directly to Harrison, noting that it had been sent from the legal counsel representing my former startup. Harrison sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener, his expression calm and unbothered. He pulled out a dense stack of legal documents, scanning the first page with a critical eye. It was a formal cease and desist order. Cameron and Savannah were officially accusing me of corporate sabotage, claiming I had maliciously locked them out of their own proprietary software to extort them. The document was filled with aggressive legal jargon, threatening massive financial penalties and criminal charges if I did not immediately surrender the master administrative passwords. But the legal threat was not their only move. The second page of the document included a list of grievances revealing Savannah's desperate attempts to salvage the sinking ship. Before I had been escorted out of the building, Savannah had managed to download a localized copy of our most sensitive client contact lists. She had been secretly emailing Zenith's top clients, attempting to poach them by offering impossibly low rates and making wildly exaggerated promises about her new operational roadmap. She was trying to steal our business to replace the accounts she was hemorrhaging. However, her complete lack of technical knowledge meant she could not answer even the most basic integration questions the Zenith clients fired back at her. Her frantic emails were forwarded directly to my new inbox by loyal account managers who found her aggressive tactics entirely unprofessional and transparent. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, as I listened to Harrison read the desperate allegations out loud. Instead of showing concern, Harrison let out a rich, genuine laugh. He tossed the cease and desist letter onto his desk like it was a piece of meaningless trash. "They have absolutely no idea what they just walked into," Harrison said, his voice laced with dark amusement. "They are trying to play a high-stakes legal game without understanding the basic rules of ownership. Savannah is sending emails from a server she does not even control, and Cameron is threatening to sue you for withholding property that legally belongs to you." It is almost sad to watch them flounder. I smiled, feeling a cold, calculating thrill rush through me. "It is time to put them out of their misery," I replied. "We need to arrange a face-to-face meeting. They want to threaten us with the police and legal action. Let us give them a stage to present their demands." Harrison agreed immediately. He instructed his legal team to contact Cameron's lawyers and arrange a formal dispute resolution meeting at a neutral mediation office downtown. The appointment was set for the following morning. Cameron and Savannah clearly believed they had forced my hand. They thought the aggressive legal threats had intimidated me into surrendering the administrative keys to the company. That night, I sat at my dining room table and prepared for the final confrontation. I did not need a team of lawyers, and I did not need a stack of defensive evidence. I only needed one specific document. I opened my personal fireproof safe. The heavy metal door swung open, revealing the neatly organized files of my life. I bypassed my personal records and reached for the thick corporate folder at the very bottom. I pulled out a single sheet of notarized paper. It was the original master licensing agreement I had drafted 3 years ago, back when Cameron was too focused on his golf swing to read the fine print. I carefully placed the pristine document into a plain manila folder. I slid the folder into my leather briefcase and snapped the lock shut. Cameron and Savannah thought they were walking into a negotiation to reclaim their stolen company. They did not realize they were walking into their own funeral. That single piece of paper was the ultimate weapon, and tomorrow it would bring Cameron's entire operation to its knees. I poured myself a single glass of red wine, savoring the deep flavor as I looked out the window at the dark city. The trap was set perfectly. I was finally ready to watch it spring completely shut. The hour was late, but I did not go to bed, after locking the licensing agreement back inside my briefcase. Before I could pour a second glass of wine, Harrison called. His expression on the video screen was serious now, stripped of the amusement he had shown when Cameron's cease and desist arrived. He had spent the evening with Zenith's general counsel, Elena Park, and she wanted one final review before we walked into mediation. Harrison made one thing absolutely clear: we would win without giving Cameron a single legitimate excuse to portray me as a thief, a saboteur, or a former executive abusing confidential information. I joined the encrypted conference from my home office. Elena appeared beside Harrison with 3 binders open across a long table. She was a precise woman in her 40s, who spoke in short, disciplined sentences. She had reconstructed the ownership chain from the date I formed my private LLC through every renewal invoice and board acknowledgement that followed. The master software licenses were registered to my entity. The domain names were registered to my entity. The vendor agreement allowed Cameron's company to use those assets only while it remained current on payment, complied with security obligations, and did not attempt an unauthorized transfer. Savannah's effort to copy client records and force entry into the administrative back-end constituted a material breach. Elena held up the original vendor agreement to the camera. The emergency suspension clause was highlighted in yellow. It permitted me to suspend access immediately when continued use threatened data security or exposed the licensor to third-party liability. A separate termination clause required written notice, which Elena's office had already drafted for delivery at the mediation. The notice would become effective at midnight, giving Cameron a final documented window to arrange a lawful transition. That distinction mattered. I was not flipping a secret switch in anger. I was enforcing a contract through counsel after a recorded breach. She then asked me to describe exactly what information I had used since joining Zenith. I answered without hesitation. I had relied on my own software architecture, publicly available market data, published renewal cycles, and knowledge that belonged to me as the creator of the licensed framework. I had not downloaded Cameron's internal customer files, copied pricing sheets, or taken proprietary documents when security escorted me out. Savannah, by contrast, had copied a client list and used it to contact accounts she believed belonged to Zenith. Elena had preserved those messages, including their metadata, because the emails would become evidence if Cameron insisted on litigation. Harrison listened in silence while Elena established a cleanroom protocol for the next several weeks. Any potential customer migrating from Cameron's platform would contact a separate Zenith intake team. I would not see Cameron's confidential pricing or internal proposals. Engineers working with my algorithm would use the source code legally assigned to my LLC, not material pulled from Cameron's servers. Every access request, migration, and contract negotiation would be logged. Harrison agreed immediately. He did not want a victory that depended on blurred lines. He wanted a result that could survive discovery and audit and the front page of every financial newspaper in the country. The review moved to my equity position. Cameron could remove me from an operational role because he controlled 60% of the voting shares, but he could not erase my 40% ownership, cancel my inspection rights, or misrepresent material risks to investors. Elena had prepared a formal demand for the company's current financial statements, board minutes, and security incident reports. She also drafted a litigation hold letter requiring Cameron, Savannah, Greg, and the internal technology team to preserve messages, expense records, access logs, and every version of the documents used to justify my termination. That was when Harrison corrected the only ambiguity left from our interview. The contract I had signed did not merely make me a senior partner. It appointed me co-chief executive officer of Zenith Technologies and granted me an equity interest that would vest immediately upon board approval. The board had voted unanimously that afternoon. Harrison turned one of the signed resolutions toward the camera. My name appeared beside his under the heading Co-Chief Executive Officer. For several seconds, I could not speak. Cameron had spent 4 years insisting that recognition had to be delayed for the good of the company. Harrison had needed less than a day to place my authority in writing. He did not frame the decision as charity or revenge. He told me Zenith needed an operator with the power to make decisions equal to the responsibility she carried. The words settled something deep inside me. I was no longer entering mediation as a discarded girlfriend, begging for access to her old workplace. I was arriving as a shareholder, an intellectual property owner, and the co-CEO of the strongest company in the market. Elena outlined the sequence for the morning. First, Cameron would be invited to state his allegations on the record. Second, his counsel would receive the ownership documents and the breach notice. Third, my LLC would offer a narrow transition license if the company paid outstanding fees, stopped using copied data, and appointed a qualified technical officer. The offer was deliberately reasonable. If Cameron rejected it, no mediator, investor, or judge could claim I had engineered the collapse simply to punish him. I was giving him a lawful path to preserve limited operations. His ego would determine whether he took it. After Elena disconnected, Harrison remained on the screen. The fierce executive expression softened slightly. He asked whether I was all right. I looked at the black briefcase resting beside my desk and told him I had never been more certain. Cameron had counted on emotion making me careless. Instead, every insult had pushed me toward greater discipline. Harrison smiled and reminded me that the strongest move in any negotiation was to know the answer before asking the question. I closed the laptop shortly after midnight. The apartment was silent, but my mind was no longer racing. The documents had been verified. The notices were ready. The evidence had been preserved. Most importantly, the line between revenge and lawful self-protection was now impossible to blur. Cameron believed the next morning would be a fight over passwords. In reality, it would be a formal accounting of who owned the foundation, who had violated the agreement, and who had been pretending to possess power that was never his. I placed the briefcase beside the front door and finally went to sleep. The following morning dawned crisp and bright, matching the absolute clarity in my mind. I met Harrison in the polished marble lobby of the downtown mediation center, precisely 10 minutes before our scheduled appointment. The building was an imposing structure of glass and steel, a fitting arena for the corporate execution we were about to perform. He glanced at the leather briefcase in my hand, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. We stepped into the elevator together, standing shoulder to shoulder in the confined space. The rising numerical display flashed above us, silently counting down the final moments of my former partner's unearned reign. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but my breathing remained perfectly steady. When we pushed through the heavy frosted glass doors of the reserved conference room, Cameron and Savannah were already seated on the opposing side of the long mahogany table. Cameron was leaning far back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest, wearing a smug expression that suggested he believed he had already won the war before the first shot was even fired. Savannah sat directly beside him, wearing a triumphant smirk and a designer blazer that likely cost more than her entire monthly salary. She had a thick stack of printed emails resting on the table in front of her, her manicured fingers tapping impatiently against the paper. "We caught you," Savannah sneered, her voice dripping with artificial superiority. She shoved the stack of printed emails forcefully across the smooth wooden surface. "We have undeniable proof that you took the master licensing agreements with you when you left the building. Hand them over right now, Madeline, or we go straight to the police." I did not flinch, nor did I look at the meaningless stack of papers she had so dramatically presented. Harrison sat beside me, resting his hands lightly on the table, watching their pathetic display with profound amusement. I unclasped the brass locks of my briefcase and pulled out the single manila folder I had prepared the night before. I opened it and slid my one legal document across the table, positioning it perfectly between Cameron and Savannah. "I did not take them, Savannah," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute, chilling certainty. "I own them." I watched closely as Cameron leaned forward, his arrogant smirk faltering as his eyes scanned the top of the notarized page. The color drained from his face so rapidly, he looked physically ill. During the fragile startup phase of our company, Cameron had completely ruined his credit score through terrible financial habits and reckless personal spending. He could not secure the vital vendor contracts we desperately needed to run our enterprise software. To save the company from immediate bankruptcy, I had formed a separate, private entity under my own name to hold the master licenses and client contracts. Cameron had been too lazy and too self-absorbed to read the foundational paperwork he signed 3 years ago. "You do not own the infrastructure, Cameron," I explained, savoring the absolute horror expanding in his widened eyes. "You are officially operating on my private property. I own the digital foundation of your entire company, and you have been using it under a vendor agreement that I personally control." The heavy, suffocating silence in the conference room was shattered only by the sound of Cameron's ragged breathing. He stared at my signature on the document, his mind desperately trying to find a loophole that simply did not exist. Savannah looked back and forth between us, her confident facade crumbling into profound confusion as she tried to understand the legal document resting on the table. "You are operating on my software licenses, Cameron," I stated clearly. driving the final nail into his corporate coffin. And I am officially terminating our vendor agreement. Your platform will go dark at midnight. The sheer magnitude of my declaration hit Cameron like a physical blow. Without the master licenses, his company could not legally operate its software service, its clients, or access its own administrative framework. In a sudden, explosive burst of blind rage, Cameron lunged across the wide mahogany table, his hands reaching out violently toward me. Before he could even cross the halfway point, Harrison moved. He stepped forward with terrifying speed and effortless strength, shoving Cameron forcefully backward. Cameron crashed back into his leather chair, the heavy piece of furniture skidding loudly against the polished floor. "Do not ever step toward her again," Harrison warned coldly, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded absolute submission. Cameron shrank back into his seat, his aggressive bravado entirely evaporated under Harrison's lethal gaze. The physical intimidation was gone, replaced by a suffocating, desperate panic. As if the universe itself was demanding immediate retribution, Cameron's cell phone began to ring endlessly inside his suit pocket. He pulled it out with trembling fingers, staring at the caller identification screen in absolute horror. It was his primary venture capitalist investor. The administrative lockdown I had initiated days ago had already caused massive system outages across their entire network, and the investors were furious about the sudden, unexplained loss of operational stability. The phone continued to vibrate violently against his palm, a relentless alarm bell signaling his impending financial ruin. Savannah stared at the ringing phone, and then she looked at Cameron's defeated, pale face. The reality of the situation finally pierced through her arrogant delusion. She realized in that exact moment that Cameron did not actually control the wealth, the power, or the company she thought he did. He was a fraud, a man who had built his entire identity on my hard work, and she had abandoned a wealthy heir to bind herself to a man who was about to lose absolutely everything. She scooted her chair away from him, physically distancing herself from his toxic presence. Her expression twisted into a mask of pure disgust and ruthless self-preservation. Cameron ignored the ringing phone, dropping it onto the table, as he turned his desperate, bloodshot eyes back to me. His arrogant tone was entirely gone, replaced by a pathetic, whining plea that echoed miserably in the quiet conference room. "You cannot do this to me, Madeline," Cameron pleaded, his hands shaking as he reached out toward my side of the table. "If you pull those critical licenses today, the investors will immediately pull all of their remaining funding. I will instantly lose everything I have ever worked so hard for in my entire life." I looked down at the pathetic man who had publicly humiliated me, the ungrateful man who had callously fired me in front of the entire operational staff just to proudly stroke his own fragile ego. And I felt absolutely nothing but profound relief washing over my entire body. I gathered my empty manila folder and placed it neatly back into my leather briefcase, snapping the brass lock shut with a sharp, decisive click. "You fired the operational architect, Cameron," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sympathy. "Now you can sit back, watch the screens, and completely enjoy the absolute collapse." I turned away from the table, stepping seamlessly to Harrison's side. We walked toward the frosted glass doors, moving with the synchronized, untouchable confidence of two people who had just executed a flawless victory. We pushed through the heavy doors and walked out into the bright, bustling hallway, leaving them sitting alone in the conference room as Cameron's phone continued to ring endlessly. The walk back to the Zenith Technologies headquarters felt entirely different from the brief drive over. The crisp afternoon air seemed to hum with the electric energy of our impending victory. Harrison walked beside me, his presence a steady anchor as my mind rapidly calculated the next sequence of events. We did not celebrate just yet. We both knew that cornering a desperate man only made him more unpredictable, and Cameron still had to face his furious financial backers. The real battle for the company's ultimate fate would take place in the digital arena the very next morning. I spent the remainder of the afternoon in my new office, compiling the financial records and server architecture blueprints I would need for the shareholder meeting. At 9, I went home long enough to shower, change clothes, and collect the written notices from my briefcase. Then I returned to Zenith before the license window closed. Cameron expected guilt to keep me awake. Preparation did. At 11:48 that night, I returned to Zenith's operations floor. The room glowed with the blue light of wall-sized dashboards, every monitor displaying a different part of the network I had spent years designing. Elena had delivered the termination notice to Cameron's counsel at the mediation, and the receipt had been acknowledged. The emergency suspension would begin at midnight, unless his company accepted the temporary transition terms. 11 minutes remained, and no acceptance had arrived. Harrison stood beside the incident commander, while Zenith's engineers monitored traffic moving through the licensed gateways. We were not connected to Cameron's internal systems, and we were not executing code inside his company. My LLC simply controlled the authentication certificates required to use the software framework. At midnight, those certificates would expire, according to the notice. Cameron's engineers could keep their own servers running, but the platform built on my licenses would no longer validate requests, process protected transactions, or open the administrative tools. At 11:52, Cameron's attorney emailed a 2-sentence response. He rejected every condition, denied that Savannah had copied confidential records, and demanded unconditional access. Elena read the message once and forwarded it to the preservation file. No one celebrated. Harrison merely asked whether the notice period and audit trail were complete. Elena confirmed they were. I authorized the suspension in writing. The final seconds appeared on the central display. At midnight, the first certificate changed from green to gray. Then another. Within 20 seconds, the dashboard representing Cameron's production environment began filling with failed authentication requests. Payment queues stopped advancing, client portals displayed maintenance notices, automated deployment tools refused to recognize administrator credentials. Nothing had been deleted, damaged, or altered. The platform was simply attempting to operate without the legal keys it had rented for 3 years. My phone began vibrating almost immediately. Cameron called first, then Greg, then 3 numbers from the company's technology department. I did not answer personal calls. Elena had instructed everyone to communicate through counsel. The engineers, however, were routed to a recorded support line, where they received the same explanation: the license had been suspended under the material breach provision, all data remained intact, and a limited migration channel was available for clients who needed to retrieve their own information. At 12:07, the first major customer activated that channel. Their general counsel had already reviewed my ownership documents and refused to risk operating on disputed infrastructure. Zenith's migration team verified the client's authority, created a clean environment, and began transferring customer-owned data through encrypted export tools. The process was slow by design. Every file was logged. Every authorization was signed. Cameron would not be able to accuse us of stealing accounts when his customers were independently choosing stability. Across town, his response grew more reckless. Access logs showed repeated attempts to reuse revoked certificates from unfamiliar addresses. One attempt came from a personal laptop registered to Savannah. Another came through an overseas virtual network. The system rejected both. Elena extremely sent a supplemental preservation notice, warning Cameron's counsel that any effort to bypass the suspension could expose individual employees to additional claims. The attempt stopped 9 minutes later. Then the calls from investors began. Richard's office contacted Zenith's legal department at 12:31, asking whether the outage was a temporary technical failure or an ownership dispute. Elena gave him no private sales pitch. She sent the same verified documents that had been presented at mediation and explained that Cameron had declined a temporary transition license. Richard asked one question: had any data been destroyed? The answer was no. Had Madeline changed the company's internal passwords after being fired? Again, no. The outage existed because Cameron had removed the owner of the licenses and then refused the lawful conditions for continued use. Harrison watched me absorb that distinction. For days, Cameron had called me vindictive. Now the timestamps notices and rejected offer told a cleaner story than any speech I could make. He had been given a bridge and set it on fire himself. At 1:10, Savannah appeared in a frantic video posted to the company's internal employee channel. One of the engineers forwarded it to counsel. She stood in the glass boardroom, blaming a cyber attack and ordering the technical team to restore the platform before sunrise. When a senior developer asked which recovery environment they should activate, she stared into the camera and demanded that he stop making excuses. 10 minutes later, that developer resigned. By 2 in the morning, 4 more engineers had submitted notices, each preserving copies of the messages instructing them to circumvent my licenses. I felt no pleasure watching competent employees trapped inside Cameron's panic. I asked Harrison whether Zenith could establish an independent recruitment line for anyone leaving the company, provided they brought no confidential files and observed their existing obligations. He approved it. We would hire talent, not stolen information. Several engineers eventually joined us, but only after legal review and clean separation from Cameron's systems. At 2:43, Greg left a voicemail. The arrogance from the lobby had disappeared. He said the board had never been told that the core platform depended on a third-party LLC. He demanded an emergency shareholder meeting at 9 the next morning and insisted that I attend because of my 40% interest. I forwarded the message to Elena without responding. By 4, the worst of the technical chaos had stabilized. Cameron's client portals remained offline, but customer data was safe. Zenith had accepted 5 authorized migrations and rejected 2 requests that lacked proper documentation. The incident dashboard showed no intrusion, no deletion, and no sabotage. It showed only a company losing access to assets it did not own. Harrison brought me coffee and stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows as the first pale light appeared over Chicago. He said Cameron would spend the shareholder meeting trying to reduce everything to a jealous former employee and a temporary glitch. I told him that was why I had spent the evening preparing something stronger than anger. The financial records, licensing history access logs, and rejected transition offer were already organized in a single presentation. By the time Cameron finished his first lie, 50 investors would be looking at the evidence that contradicted it. I went home before dawn and slept for 2 hours. The platform stayed dark. The evidence stayed intact. At 9 o'clock, Cameron would have to explain why the company he claimed to control could not function without the woman he had escorted out of the building. The following morning arrived with a heavy overcast sky that perfectly matched the brewing corporate storm. I arrived at the Zenith executive suite an hour early. Harrison had already instructed his technical team to set up a secure, encrypted connection to my former company's emergency shareholder meeting. Because I had never formally surrendered my original shares, I still legally owned 40% of the equity. Cameron could easily fire me from my operational role, but he could not legally ban a primary owner from a massive emergency financial briefing. Harrison pulled up a leather chair beside mine as the large wall monitor blinked to life. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the grid of video feeds populate one by one. 50 individual investors, aggressive venture capitalists, and angry board members appeared on the screen. The atmosphere in the virtual room was already incredibly toxic before the meeting even officially began. Microphones were unmuted, capturing the sounds of frustrated executives demanding immediate answers from their panicked assistants. These were powerful people who managed millions of dollars, and their entire investment portfolio was currently offline and bleeding cash. Cameron and Savannah finally joined the call. They were broadcasting from the very same glass-walled boardroom where they had callously fired me just weeks prior. The visual contrast was absolutely staggering. Cameron looked as though he had not slept in days. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes darted nervously toward the camera lens, and a visible sheen of sweat coated his forehead. He was no longer the arrogant, charismatic leader who easily charmed his way into massive funding rounds. He was a cornered animal, realizing the trap had completely snapped shut. Savannah sat tightly beside him, wearing a bright pink designer dress that looked absurdly out of place in a crisis management scenario. She kept adjusting her hair, her eyes wide with a frantic, unearned confidence. Cameron cleared his throat, leaning close to the boardroom microphone. He attempted to project his usual smooth, reassuring tone, but his voice cracked noticeably on the very first syllable. He thanked the board for joining on such short notice and immediately launched into a heavily rehearsed, entirely fabricated narrative. I want to assure everyone that the current software blackout is merely a temporary technical glitch, Cameron stated, wiping his forehead with the back of his trembling hand. We are experiencing a minor, localized server issue caused by a disgruntled former employee who attempted to cause disruptions on her way out the door. We have our best engineers working around the clock to bypass the localized locks. We expect to be fully operational within the next 48 hours. He was sweating profusely now, the bright boardroom lights highlighting his absolute panic. He was desperately trying to gaslight 50 of the most ruthless financial minds in the city, painting me as a petty, vindictive secretary who had simply unplugged a router in a fit of jealousy. He deliberately avoided mentioning the master licensing agreements, praying the board would not realize the fundamental legal difference between a simple technical error and a complete loss of intellectual property rights. The investors were absolutely not buying his performance. An older venture capitalist from New York interrupted Cameron mid-sentence, his voice echoing harshly through the audio feed. We do not care about a disgruntled employee, Cameron. We care about the fact that our clients have been locked out of their payment gateways since midnight. You promised us 99% uptime. Our legal departments are already drafting breach of contract notices as we speak. Sensing the rapidly deteriorating situation, Savannah decided it was her moment to shine. She leaned into the camera frame, flashing a bright, incredibly artificial smile that completely failed to reach her eyes. She clearly believed she could effortlessly charm her way out of a catastrophic infrastructure failure using the exact same flirtatious tactics she used at wealthy country club luncheons. We completely understand your frustrations, Savannah chimed in, her voice overly cheerful and grating to the ear. But I want to assure you that this small transition period is actually a beautiful blessing in disguise. Once we clear out the old, outdated systems, we are going to implement a massive rebranding strategy. We are focusing on high-level synergy and cross-platform vertical integration. The new operational roadmap will attract a much more sophisticated client base. She threw out meaningless corporate buzzwords like confetti, completely failing to address the actual crisis burning down around them. The grid of faces on the large monitor shifted from angry to profoundly incredulous. A lead technical investor unmuted his line, his expression deadly serious and devoid of any patience. Synergy, the investor, demanded, his voice thick with unadulterated disdain. I do not care about your rebranding strategy, Savannah. I care about the back-end architecture right now. What is the exact status of the encrypted database migrations? How are you routing the active API endpoints while the primary servers are compromised? Savannah froze completely. Her artificial smile remained plastered on her face, but her eyes widened in sheer, undeniable panic. She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked desperately at Cameron for a lifeline that he could not provide. She did not know what an API endpoint was. She had absolutely no idea how to answer even the most basic technical question. Her complete and utter incompetence was suddenly laid bare for every single financial backer to witness in real time. The realization hit the virtual room like a devastating physical shockwave. The board members suddenly understood that the woman Cameron had proudly installed as the chief operations officer was completely technologically illiterate. They realized that their massive financial backing was tied to a sophisticated digital platform that currently had absolutely no one capable of steering it. The heavy silence that followed Savannah's humiliating failure was deafening. Then Greg unmuted his microphone. The lead board member who had smugly told me to take my box and leave was now red-faced and hyperventilating. He stared into his web camera, his previous arrogance entirely replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. He had personally vouched for Cameron and Savannah to his own wealthy network, and his reputation was currently burning to the ground alongside the dying company. Greg raised his hand, pointing a shaking finger directly at the camera lens, as if he could physically reach through the screen and strangle Cameron himself. "Cameron, you told us she was just a secretary!" Greg screamed, his voice breaking with absolute fury. "You told us you built the algorithm!" I leaned forward slowly. I clicked the button and unmuted my microphone, ready to drop the financial hammer. "I built the algorithm I stated," my voice echoing clearly through the virtual meeting room, cutting through the chaotic shouting. "And I have just integrated it entirely into Zenith Technologies." "You backed the wrong horse." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. I shared my screen, and the gallery of stunned faces was replaced by a timeline built from bank statements, board reports, vendor invoices, and server logs. Elena had required every source to be independently authenticated before the meeting. A forensic accounting firm retained by Zenith had reviewed the numbers overnight, and its signed verification appeared in the corner of each page. Cameron could call me bitter, but he could not call the records imaginary. I began with the last quarter in which I controlled operations. Revenue had risen 12%. Customer churn was below 3%. Infrastructure costs were stable, and the company held enough cash to operate for 14 months without additional funding. Then I advanced the timeline to the day Cameron began preparing Savannah's return. The pattern changed immediately. 2 company vehicles had been purchased within 6 days, a luxury sedan assigned to Cameron and a sports utility vehicle assigned to Savannah before she was even formally employed. Together, they cost more than the annual salaries of 3 senior engineers. The invoices identified the purchases as executive transportation required for investor relations, yet mileage logs showed repeated weekend trips to private clubs, resorts, and shopping districts. No client meetings appeared on the calendars for those dates. Next came Savannah's compensation package. Cameron had approved a 6-figure signing bonus, a housing allowance, and a discretionary entertainment budget without presenting the package to the full board. The resolution in the official minutes had been added after the meeting and carried an electronic signature from a director who was overseas at the time. The director unmuted his microphone and said he had never seen the document. Greg's face shifted from anger to alarm. I opened the version history. The resolution had been created on Cameron's laptop 40 minutes after the board meeting ended. Greg asked whether I was accusing the chief executive of falsifying minutes. I answered that I was showing metadata and allowing the board's counsel to reach its own conclusion. The counsel confirmed that the discrepancy required immediate preservation and review. Then I displayed the customer loss report. Savannah had promised investors that her social connections would open elite markets, but the actual results showed 7 enterprise customers issuing notices of breach after the platform outage. 3 had already exercised migration rights. 2 others had suspended payments because Cameron's company could not meet uptime obligations. Projected annual revenue had fallen by nearly 30% in 14 days, while legal exposure from service-level penalties was climbing by the hour. Cameron interrupted, claiming the figures assumed the outage would continue. I switched to the correspondence for mediation. The temporary transition license sat on the screen, showing a lawful route to limited service. Beside it was the rejection sent by his attorney. The investors read the two documents side by side. Cameron had not been deprived of every option. He had refused the only option capable of preserving operations because it required him to acknowledge my ownership and remove Savannah from administrative access. I moved to the system logs. They showed that I had not entered Cameron's network after security took my keycard. No passwords had been changed from my devices, no files had been deleted. At midnight, the authentication certificates expired exactly as described in the written notice. Afterward, repeated bypass attempts came from Savannah's laptop and an overseas virtual network. Those attempts had triggered automatic security blocks, not retaliatory code from me. The lead technical investor asked whether customer information had been exposed. I answered that there was no evidence of exfiltration from the licensed platform, but Savannah had copied a localized contact list before my departure and used it for unauthorized solicitations. I displayed 3 of her emails, with identifying customer details redacted. Each message offered prices Cameron's company could not sustain and claimed technical capabilities the platform did not possess. 2 recipients had forwarded the emails to Zenith and requested that their data be removed from Cameron's marketing systems. Savannah leaned toward the camera and accused me of fabricating the messages. Elena supplied the original message headers to the board's counsel. The sending domain timestamp and device signature matched Savannah's company account. She stopped speaking. I returned to the financial statements and highlighted a line Cameron had labeled Strategic Consulting. More than $800,000 had moved through that category in 3 months. The recipients included a public relations firm owned by Greg's former business partner, a luxury event planner, and a shell consulting company registered to an address used by Cameron's personal accountant. Greg demanded that I remove his name from the accusation. I told him his name was not in my presentation. The payment records were. If he had no involvement, the forensic audit would protect him. If he did, shouting would not. Several investors began requesting copies of the audit file. I refused to distribute it casually. The complete package would go to the board's independent counsel and any regulator with proper authority. What mattered for the meeting was the conclusion the company had not failed because one former employee unplugged a server. It had failed because its chief executive concealed the ownership of its essential technology, installed an unqualified officer, rejected a lawful transition, spent investor money on personal prestige, and presented altered records as corporate approvals. Finally, I opened the structural diagram. At the center was my LLC, connected to the master licenses source code rights security certificates and vendor contracts. Cameron's startup appeared beside it as a licensee, not an owner. Zenith appeared on the other side under a newly executed agreement that had been reviewed by both companies' counsel. My algorithm was operating legally at Zenith because its owner had authorized the use. Cameron's platform was dark because its license had been suspended after breach and formal notice. The diagram remained on screen, while the implications spread across the virtual room. Investors who had spent years praising Cameron's vision were now reading the name printed at the center of the architecture. Madeline Reyes, managing member. No amount of charisma could move it. I stopped sharing my screen. 50 video windows returned, but the anger had changed direction. Cameron looked smaller in the glass boardroom, trapped between Savannah's panic and the evidence he could no longer dismiss. Greg stared at the desk in front of him. Board counsel whispered to an assistant and began issuing preservation instructions. Richard, the ruthless New York venture capitalist who led the largest funding syndicate, slowly unmuted his microphone. His face was scarlet, but his voice was controlled. He asked Cameron whether there was any verified document capable of contradicting what the board had just seen. Cameron opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Richard leaned closer to the camera, and the financial guillotine began to fall. "We are pulling all future funding rounds immediately," Richard announced, his voice vibrating with a lethal, contained fury. "We are initiating a complete forensic audit of your expenditures, Cameron. Furthermore, my firm will be transferring our financial backing directly to Zenith Technologies, effective this afternoon. We invest in stable infrastructure and competent leadership, neither of which exist at this company." The financial guillotine had dropped. The decapitation of Cameron's corporate empire was swift, brutal, and entirely televised for 50 executives to witness. The chat log on the virtual meeting platform exploded with frantic messages from minor stakeholders demanding their money back. The realization of their catastrophic loss caused an immediate chain reaction of panic. The boardroom erupted into total pandemonium. The board members who had previously mocked me, the same men who had smugly enabled Cameron's worst impulses, suddenly turned on him with vicious aggression. They shouted over each other in the virtual meeting room, their voices overlapping in a frantic chorus of blame and self-preservation. Greg leaned into his camera, his silver hair disheveled, his face shining with sweat. He was no longer the arrogant executive who had blocked my path in the lobby. He was a desperate man, watching his professional reputation burn to ash. "Cameron, you lied to us!" Greg shouted, slamming his fist against his desk. "You presented fraudulent operational reports. You told us the infrastructure was secure. You are going to face federal charges for this level of deception." Greg then turned his desperate eyes toward my video feed. He clasped his hands together in a pathetic display of pleading. "Madeline, please, you have to understand my position," Greg begged, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. "I was operating on false information, provided by a manipulative chief executive. If I had known the truth about your invaluable contributions, I never would have allowed that termination to happen. We can restructure the board immediately and give you complete operational control. Just please do not take those master licenses to Zenith." I stared at Greg through the high-definition monitor, my expression completely blank. I did not offer him a single word of forgiveness or understanding. I simply ignored his pathetic apology, letting his desperate pleas hang unanswered in the digital space. He had made his choice when he told me to take my cardboard box and leave the building. Beside Cameron, Savannah was breathing heavily. Her chest heaved as her eyes darted rapidly between the angry investors shouting on the screen and the financial documents I was still displaying. She realized that the massive wealth she had aggressively plotted to secure was completely gone. Cameron did not control a thriving technology empire. He was steering a sinking ship straight to the bottom of the ocean, and she was currently handcuffed to the mast. Savannah pushed her chair back violently. She stood up, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She turned to Cameron, completely disregarding the powerful executives watching their interaction live on camera. "You told me you were rich!" Savannah shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly through the room. "You told me you owned everything. You promised me we were going to take this company public and buy a sprawling house in the Hamptons. You are nothing but a broke liar." Cameron reached out his hands, trembling violently. "Savannah, please, we can fix this. Just give me a chance to explain." "Do not touch me," Savannah snapped, recoiling from him. She reached up to her designer blazer and violently ripped off her corporate security badge. She threw the plastic card directly at his face. The badge hit his cheek and clattered onto the mahogany table. "I am not going down with your mistakes, Cameron. We are completely finished." Savannah grabbed her expensive handbag and stormed out of the boardroom. She did not look back. She pushed through the heavy glass doors and disappeared down the long hallway, fleeing the corporate disaster zone forever. She had abandoned a wealthy heir to secure a better financial future with Cameron, and now she was walking away with absolutely nothing but the impending humiliation of her own choices. Cameron was left sitting completely alone at the head of the massive boardroom table. The man who had been so eager to humiliate me in this exact room just a few weeks prior was now utterly broken. He slumped forward, burying his face in his shaking hands. The confident, untouchable facade had entirely shattered. Cameron slowly lifted his head, turning his bloodshot eyes toward the web camera. Tears were streaming down his face, cutting tracks through the sweat on his pale cheeks. He ignored the furious investors who were still shouting demands and issuing severe legal threats. He focused his attention entirely on my video feed. "Please, Madeline," Cameron begged, his voice a pathetic, ragged sob. "Please do not do this to me. I will lose absolutely everything. The investors will ruin my life. I will go to federal prison. I am so sorry for what I did to you. I was confused and stressed, but I always loved you. We were going to get married. We were going to build a beautiful life together." He leaned closer to the microphone, his raw desperation suffocating the virtual room. "You cannot just leave me like this, Madeline. I am nothing without you. Please come back." The absolute silence in the Zenith Technologies executive suite contrasted sharply with the chaotic pleading radiating from the monitor. Harrison sat perfectly still beside me, watching the final destruction of his rival with a look of profound, unwavering respect for the trap I had flawlessly executed. I sat back in my plush leather chair, my posture impeccable. I stared at Cameron's pathetic display. The man who had callously discarded my 4 years of loyalty was now begging me to save him from a devastating fire he had started with his own hands. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or remorse. I felt only the cold, sharp satisfaction of absolute justice. I took a slow, steady breath, looking directly into the camera lens, fully prepared to deliver my final judgment. "You are exactly what you always were," I reply, my voice slicing through the frantic digital static and silencing his pathetic, ragged sobs. "A placeholder." I do not wait for his inevitable, desperate response or another hollow apology. I reach forward and firmly press the button to terminate the connection. The large wall monitor in our office instantly goes completely black, cutting off the chaotic pleas and the disastrous remnants of the company I had built from the ground up. The sudden, absolute silence in the executive suite is deafening, yet it feels incredibly peaceful. The chaotic shouting of the angry board members, the frantic notifications of failing servers, and the humiliating sound of a grown man begging for a salvation he did not deserve are all extinguished with a single keystroke. I exhale a long, steady breath that I feel like I have been holding in my chest for the past 3 years. The heavy, suffocating weight of betrayal and unacknowledged labor finally lifts from my shoulders, replaced by the cool, sharp clarity of absolute vindication. When I turn my head, Harrison is watching me from across our new shared office. He is leaning casually against the edge of his expansive mahogany desk, his arms crossed over his tailored chest, but his posture lacks its usual relaxed indifference. Instead, his dark eyes are fixed on me with a look of profound, unwavering admiration. He does not offer empty congratulations or unnecessary platitudes. He does not need to speak for me to know that he recognizes the sheer precision of the trap I just closed. We both understand the magnitude of what has just transpired in that digital meeting room. The immediate threat Cameron posed to my livelihood, my intellectual property, and my professional reputation has been flawlessly neutralized. I have completely dismantled his stolen empire in less than an hour, stripping him of his wealth, his enablers, and his false prestige. However, the corporate battlefield is vast, and cutting the head off the snake is only the first step in our broader strategy. The technology industry is notoriously fickle, driven by whispered rumors, carefully curated optics, and the ruthless pursuit of the next lucrative innovation. It is not enough to simply watch my former partner burn to the ground in the privacy of a closed boardroom. The destruction of his company will inevitably create a massive power vacuum in the market, and nature abhors a vacuum. The entire industry needs to know exactly who holds the power now. They need to understand that the architectural genius they previously attributed to a charismatic fraud actually belongs to me, and that I am now operating with the full backing of Zenith Technologies. The subsequent week passes in an absolute blur of relentless, exhilarating momentum. Harrison and I spend the next few days sequestered in our executive suite, working long into the night to meticulously integrate the massive influx of funding that pours in from Cameron's rapidly defecting former investors. Richard, the notoriously ruthless venture capitalist who had initiated the mass exodus during the emergency meeting, proves entirely true to his word. By Tuesday morning, his firm has legally severed all ties with Cameron's sinking ship and officially transferred their entire financial backing directly to Zenith Technologies. The rest of the panicked board members quickly follow suit, desperate to align themselves with competent, stable leadership before their initial investments evaporate entirely. The sudden massive injection of capital allows us to scale Zenith's operations at a staggering, unprecedented rate. We move with surgical precision. We hire the best engineering talent in the city, ruthlessly poaching top developers who are eager to jump ship from failing competitors. We expand our secure server infrastructure to handle the massive incoming wave of client migrations, ensuring that our new customers experience flawless transitions. Most importantly, we officially absorb the master software licenses that Cameron had foolishly believed he controlled permanently, integrating my proprietary algorithm into Zenith's core systems. Zenith Technologies experiences unprecedented growth, transforming from a quiet, formidable rival into an absolute industry juggernaut, seemingly overnight. By Thursday morning, our decisive corporate takeover is making headline news across all major business publications and financial networks. The media coverage is relentless. Financial analysts and tech commentators are endlessly fascinated by the swift, brutal execution of the market shift. Prominent articles praise Zenith's innovative architecture and flawless operational strategy, highlighting our capacity to absorb a massive market share without a single technical hiccup. Simultaneously, the press ruthlessly dissects the catastrophic collapse of our predecessor. The financial mismanagement, the luxury car purchases, and the sheer incompetence of Savannah's brief tenure as Chief Operations Officer are laid bare for the entire world to scrutinize. Cameron, meanwhile, becomes a cautionary tale. He is blacklisted from the technology community. No reputable venture capitalist will take his calls. No banking institution will extend him a line of credit. And the civil audit and regulatory inquiries initiated after the shareholder meeting bury him in legal fees. His name, once associated with charismatic startup success, becomes radioactive. Former loyalists abandon him when the altered records and undisclosed licensing dependents are confirmed. He faces bankruptcy creditor claims and restrictions that could end his executive career permanently. Late Friday afternoon, as the initial chaos of our massive expansion finally begins to settle into a steady, profitable rhythm, an elegant courier arrives at the Zenith Executive Suite. He bypasses the standard reception desk, carrying a silver tray holding two thick matte black envelopes sealed with intricate metallic wax. Harrison intercepts the delivery, bringing the envelopes directly to my desk. His lips curve into a slow, knowing smile as he leans against the glass wall overlooking the sprawling city skyline. He hands one of the heavy envelopes to me, his dark eyes shining with quiet, dangerous anticipation. I carefully break the silver wax seal and slide out the thick cardstock inside. They are exclusive, highly personalized invitations for the annual Tech Innovators Gala scheduled to take place the following weekend in downtown Manhattan. It is universally recognized as the most exclusive, highly coveted event of the entire year. It is a glittering elite gathering of the wealthiest, most powerful figures in the global technology sector. Only the absolute elite of the industry ever receive an invitation, and appearing at this particular gala is the ultimate confirmation of market dominance. We have successfully secured the massive funding built the superior software platform and completely annihilated the competition. Now it is time to claim our rightful throne in front of the very people who define the market. Harrison walks slowly around my desk, looking down at the elegant invitation resting in my hands. The golden hour sunlight catches the sharp lines of his tailored suit as he extends his arm toward me. "Ready to make our official debut?" he asks, his voice a low, steady rumble that perfectly echoes the absolute certainty beating in my own heart. I look up at him, studying the fierce, unrelenting intelligence in his gaze, then look back down at the elegant silver lettering shining brightly on the black card. Our long journey from profound public humiliation to absolute, undeniable power is finally complete. The ultimate public victory awaits. The following weekend, Harrison and I flew to Manhattan on Zenith's corporate jet with Elena and a small communications team. The trip was not a celebration disguised as business. During the flight, counsel completed the final due diligence checklist for a possible purchase of Cameron's remaining assets. After the investors withdrew, the company's secured lenders had accelerated their debt and placed the collateral under a court-supervised restructuring process. Zenith had submitted a bid through the appointed restructuring advisor. Every step was documented, competitive, and subject to creditor approval. If the closing occurred before the gala, we would announce it only after the final signatures were confirmed. By the time our car reached the hotel, the evening sky had turned deep blue above Manhattan. Barricades lined the entrance, holding back reporters, photographers, and industry spectators. The Tech Innovators Gala occupied 3 floors of the landmark hotel, but the main ballroom was reserved for the keynote ceremony. Through the windows, I could see chandeliers glowing over hundreds of guests in black tie. I had chosen an emerald gown because it made me feel unmistakably visible. For years I had dressed to disappear beside Cameron, selecting quiet colors and restrained silhouettes so he could dominate photographs. That night the fabric caught every flash of light. Harrison waited in the hotel suite, wearing a black tuxedo, and for once, the ruthless CEO appeared briefly speechless. He recovered by telling me that the technology press was about to forget every photograph Cameron had ever staged. We entered the lobby together. The media lines surged forward, calling my name before Harrison's. That small reversal would have destroyed Cameron's ego. For me, it felt less like revenge than correction. Reporters asked about Zenith's sudden growth, the migration of former clients, and the future of my licensed platform. I gave disciplined answers. We had protected customer data, honored every legal process, and built stability where the market had experienced chaos. I did not mention the pending acquisition. Until Elena confirmed the closing, it did not exist publicly. A financial network correspondent asked whether my relationship with Harrison had influenced my appointment as co-CEO. Harrison started to answer, but I touched his sleeve and stepped toward the microphone myself. I explained that the board had reviewed my operating record, intellectual property portfolio, and market performance before approving the position unanimously. Our personal relationship had developed afterward, under the scrutiny of independent directors and counsel. The correspondent nodded, deprived of the scandal she expected. Inside the ballroom, the shift in my status became even clearer. Founders who once directed every question to Cameron now approached me with detailed discussions about secure migration architecture. Venture capitalists introduced their partners. Engineers asked whether Zenith would establish a research fellowship around my framework. Harrison never interrupted or redirected the attention toward himself. He stood at my side, contributing when invited, and allowing me to occupy the space I had earned. Near the center of the room, Greg attempted to approach. His silver hair was immaculate again, but the confidence he wore in the old lobby had not returned. He carried a champagne glass with both hands and rehearsed a smile as he moved through the crowd. Before he reached us, one member of Harrison's security detail stepped calmly into his path. Greg insisted that he only wanted 60 seconds to apologize. The guard looked toward me for instruction. I could have humiliated Greg publicly. Instead, I crossed the remaining distance and spoke quietly enough that the cameras could not hear. He began explaining that Cameron had misled him, that Savannah's connections had seemed valuable, and that he had never understood the true ownership structure. I reminded him that ignorance did not explain the words he chose when I carried a cardboard box through the lobby. He had called me a placeholder because he believed power had already decided the truth. Greg lowered his eyes. He offered to support any civil claim I brought against Cameron and asked whether Zenith might consider him for an advisory role. I told him cooperation with investigators was an obligation, not a bargaining chip. Zenith did not need an advisor who discovered integrity only after the share price collapsed. I wished him a good evening and walked away. Harrison's guard did not need to touch him. Greg remained beside the column, surrounded by people who suddenly found other conversations more important. At our reserved table, Harrison introduced me to his father, who had flown in for the event. The older man's booming voice was instantly recognizable from the interview call. He shook my hand, studied Harrison with exaggerated suspicion, and said his son had finally made one intelligent personal decision without a committee. The teasing dissolved the last of my tension. Harrison's mother embraced me and said she had followed every article about the shareholder meeting. Neither parent treated me as an accessory to their son. They asked about my work, my plans for the company, and the engineers I intended to promote. As dinner service began, Elena approached our table and placed a slim black folder beside Harrison's plate. She did not announce what it contained. Harrison opened it beneath the tablecloth, read the first page, and handed it to me. The court-appointed restructuring officer secured lenders and creditor committee had approved Zenith's asset purchase. The final electronic signatures had been completed 12 minutes earlier. The office lease hardware brand marks and lawful database assets would transfer at closing. Customer-owned data remained subject to consent and privacy restrictions. Cameron's personal liabilities did not transfer. I read the confirmation twice. The company that had escorted me out was no longer Cameron's stage. Its remaining assets belonged to Zenith through a process his creditors had accepted because our bid preserved jobs, customer service, and recoverable value. Harrison asked whether I wanted the communications team to release the announcement immediately. I looked toward the ballroom entrance and decided to wait until after the keynote. The night did not need another spectacle. A precise statement the next morning would be enough. The lights gradually dimmed. Conversations softened as the master of ceremonies walked toward the podium. Giant screens displayed the title of the keynote presentation, The Architects of Trust. Harrison reached beneath the table and took my hand. Across the room, journalists settled into their seats, unaware that the most important transaction of the evening had already closed. The keynote speaker adjusted the microphone and began thanking the sponsors. Then, a violent crash sounded behind us. The heavy oak doors struck the walls, and every head in the ballroom turned toward the entrance. 2 security guards stumbled through the doorway, with Cameron fighting between them. He had somehow obtained an old sponsor credential before the company collapsed and used it to enter a restricted service corridor. His tuxedo jacket was missing his white shirt, was untucked, and sweat darkened the fabric beneath his arms. The polished founder who once practiced magazine poses in our office had been replaced by a desperate man who smelled of alcohol and panic. Camera flashes erupted before the guards could pull him back. Cameron saw me at the front table and twisted free long enough to stagger into the main aisle. He pointed at me with a shaking hand. "Madeline, you stole everything from me!" he shouted. "You took my investors, my company, and Savannah. You planned this because you could not stand seeing me choose her." Harrison rose, but I placed a hand on his forearm. Security was already closing in. I did not need a physical defender, and I did not want Cameron removed before the room understood why he had come. I nodded to the head guard, asking for 1 minute. The guard positioned 2 men within arm's reach and allowed Cameron to stop several yards from our table. The ballroom became completely silent. Journalists lifted recorders. Industry executives who had watched the shareholder meeting stared at Cameron with a mixture of disgust and fascination. His collapse was no longer a rumor in a financial column. It was standing beneath the chandeliers, demanding an audience. I stood and stepped into the aisle. I told him I had not taken Savannah. She had left when she discovered that the wealth she wanted belonged to investors, lenders, and a company whose core technology he did not own. I had not taken his funding. Investors withdrew after reviewing verified records and hearing him fail to answer basic questions about the business. I had not taken his company. I had enforced the contract attached to property that had always belonged to my LLC. Cameron shook his head violently. He shouted that he had been the face of the brand, the man who charmed the board and secured the seed money. According to him, I had merely written code in the background while he transformed it into a company. The old claim sounded weaker in a room filled with people who had now examined the architecture, financial statements, and ownership documents. Greg moved out of the crowd, apparently hoping to prevent another public disaster. He told Cameron to leave before he embarrassed everyone associated with the startup. Cameron spun toward him and laughed bitterly. He reminded Greg that he had supported the firing, praised Savannah's pedigree, and called me a workhorse. Then Cameron accused him of defecting the moment the servers went dark. For once, Greg had no defense. I told both men that the argument between them did not rewrite what happened. Cameron had chosen ego over competence. Greg had chosen proximity to power over evidence. Savannah had chosen status over substance. Each of them had received exactly the information necessary to make a better decision, and each had rejected it because the truth did not flatter them. Cameron turned back to me. His anger cracked, revealing fear underneath. He said the lenders had frozen his accounts, his landlord had begun eviction proceedings, and lawyers were demanding retainers he could no longer pay. He claimed I had already won, and asked why I could not restore the licenses long enough for him to sell the business. I reminded him that I had offered a temporary transition at mediation. He had rejected it. Restoring the licenses after the board discovered altered records and unauthorized access attempts would expose customers, employees, and investors to further risk. My responsibility was not to rescue the man who caused the emergency. It was to protect the people who had been forced to depend on his decisions. His face tightened again. "You did this because you were jealous," he said, louder now. "You could not handle that Savannah was sophisticated enough to take us public." I almost laughed. Instead, I asked him to name one operational decision Savannah had made successfully. He could not. I asked him to explain an API endpoint, the question she failed to answer during the shareholder meeting. He stared at me. I asked him to identify the clause he claimed gave his company ownership of my licenses. His mouth opened, but no words followed. The silence exposed him more completely than any insult could. He had arrived expecting emotion to become evidence. He had nothing else. I walked a few steps closer, remaining outside his reach. I told him jealousy had never driven my ambition. Relief had. The moment he handed Savannah my authority, he revealed how little he understood the company. The moment he fired me, he ended the obligation that had kept me carrying him. The moment he rejected the transition agreement, he chose collapse over acknowledging that the foundation was mine. Cameron's eyes searched the audience for sympathy. He found Richard's several former board members and clients who had migrated to Zenith. None looked away from him, but none stepped forward. The world he believed he controlled had become a room full of witnesses. He lowered his voice and tried one final approach. He said we had planned to marry, that 4 years together should mean something, and that I could not erase the life we built. I told him I was not erasing it. I was finally describing it accurately. I had built the systems, carried the debt, protected the clients, and defended his reputation. He had mistaken my loyalty for proof that he was indispensable. You called me a placeholder, I said. But a placeholder occupies a space until the real thing arrives. That was your role in my life, Cameron. You occupied the position of partner until I understood what an actual equal looked like. Harrison did not smile or claim the comparison. He simply stood beside me, calm and certain, demonstrating the difference without a word. Cameron lurched toward the podium, trying to seize the microphone. Security caught both arms before he reached it. He thrashed once, shouting that the company was still his and that no one could take his name from the building. His insistence created the opening I had not intended to use that night. I looked toward Elena. She held the closed acquisition folder against her side and gave one small nod. The transaction was final. Every legal condition had been satisfied. Cameron had chosen to challenge ownership in front of the press, and the answer was now a matter of public record. I raised my hand, asking security not to remove him yet. Then I turned away from Cameron and faced the cameras gathered around the ballroom. Since you brought the ownership of your former company into this room, I said, I think the market deserves an accurate update. The reporters moved closer, forming a wide semicircle around the aisle. I waited until the room settled. Cameron remained between two guards, breathing hard, his wrists pinned safely at his sides. Harrison joined me, without taking the microphone or the center of the frame. Elena stood a few steps behind us with the closing folder. As of 12 minutes before the keynote began, I announced Zenith Technologies completed the purchase of the remaining assets of Cameron's former startup through its court-supervised restructuring process. The room reacted with a sharp collective gasp. I continued before speculation could replace facts. After Cameron's investors withdrew, the company's secured lenders accelerated their debt. An independent restructuring advisor opened a competitive sale process. Zenith submitted a documented bid, completed technical and financial due diligence, and received approval from the secured lenders, the creditor committee, and the court-appointed officer. The transaction had not been arranged in a private hallway or stolen through influence. It had been approved because our proposal preserved more value, protected customer continuity, and offered qualified employees a lawful path forward. I took the black folder from Elena and held up the executed closing certificate. The company that once occupied the glass headquarters would become a limited Zenith subsidiary during integration. We had acquired the office lease, server hardware, registered trademarks, and transferable commercial assets. We had not acquired Cameron's personal debts, disputed expense obligations, or liability for his representations to investors. Customer data would move only with contractual authority and privacy consent. Employees would be evaluated individually, without requiring anyone to carry confidential material from the old business. The details mattered. Cameron had spent the evening accusing me of destroying a functioning empire and stealing it from him. The record showed something else. Creditors had sold the remaining assets of an insolvent company after its chief executive lost investor support, breached essential licensing terms, and failed to present a credible rescue plan. Cameron strained against the guards. He shouted that I had forced the bankruptcy by shutting down the platform. Elena stepped forward and stated that the restructuring file contained the rejected transition offer, the emergency suspension notice, the access logs, and the board's independent audit. The lenders had reviewed all of it. They concluded that the platform's dependence on my licenses had been disclosed in signed contracts, while Cameron's failure to disclose that dependence to investors was his responsibility. Richard rose from his table. He did not address me. He looked directly at Cameron and confirmed that the funding syndicate had been prepared to support a temporary stabilization plan if Cameron accepted independent oversight and removed Savannah from system access. Cameron had refused. No one had pushed him away from the bridge. He had chosen not to cross it. I turned back to the audience. Zenith had not purchased the business to preserve Cameron's mythology. We purchased useful assets, protected customers, and recovered value from a collapse. The old brand would disappear after the transition. My operational framework would remain part of Zenith, where it was legally licensed, properly governed, and supported by engineers who understood it. Then I allowed myself one personal sentence. "We purchased the desk where my termination papers were signed," I said. "We purchased the glass boardroom where I was called disposable." But ownership of furniture is not the victory. The victory is that no one will use that room again to pretend another person's work is invisible. The cameras flashed so rapidly that the ballroom seemed filled with lightning. Executives began whispering to one another, calculating the scope of the acquisition. Several former clients applauded first. Engineers joined them. The reaction spread across the room, not because a rival had been humiliated, but because the market finally understood the precision of the reversal. Cameron stopped fighting. The color drained from his face as he stared at the closing certificate. The company bearing his name was no longer his. Even the symbolic objects he had used to perform authority belonged to the competitor he could never defeat, and the woman he had tried to remove. He whispered that I had left him with nothing. I corrected him one final time. The restructuring had not taken his ability to tell the truth, cooperate with the audit, or accept responsibility. Those choices remained his. Whether he used them would determine what happened next. His knees weakened. The guards tightened their hold and lowered him into a nearby chair before he could strike the floor. A medic from the event staff checked him and confirmed that he was conscious. Cameron covered his face and began sobbing the sound small beneath the clicking cameras. I signaled to the head of security. This time there would be no second entrance, no escape from a holding corridor, and no repeated spectacle. The guards escorted him through the main doors, while 2 additional officers secured the hallway. He called my name once, but I did not turn around. The heavy doors closed with a single final thud. I faced the ballroom again. The acquisition was complete. The record was clear. Cameron had been allowed to make every accusation he carried into the room, and each one had been answered with documents rather than rage. There was nothing left to argue. For a fraction of a second, the ballroom remained suspended in absolute silence. The sheer brutality and flawless execution of the acquisition announcement leave the crowd breathless. Then the keynote speaker at the podium begins to clap. It starts as a slow, deliberate rhythm, echoing sharply in the quiet space. An older venture capitalist stands up, joining the applause. Within seconds, the entire room erupts into a thunderous, deafening roar. Hundreds of industry titans, brilliant engineers, and ruthless investors rise to their feet in a unified standing ovation. This is not polite, obligatory clapping. It is a genuine recognition of a masterclass in business strategy and personal vindication. I turn my head and look at Harrison. He is standing right beside me, tall and unyielding, but the usual guarded coolness of his demeanor is completely gone. He is beaming with absolute, unadulterated pride. His dark eyes shine with a fierce admiration that makes my heart race faster than the applause of 100 billionaires. He reaches out and takes my hand, lacing his fingers securely through mine, anchoring me in the reality of our shared triumph. I look out at the sea of flashing cameras and cheering faces, feeling the last fragments of my past trauma dissolve. The woman who was humiliated in that boardroom a few weeks ago no longer exists. The rest of the evening unfolds as a glittering, triumphant celebration. The formal dinner service quickly becomes a high-stakes networking frenzy, and our table is the absolute center of gravity for the entire gala. Powerful investors and legendary tech moguls literally line up to shake my hand. Men and women who previously ignored my existence in favor of Cameron's loud charisma now wait patiently for a single minute of my time. They speak to me with profound respect, asking intricate questions about my software architecture. I answer them with effortless confidence, knowing I hold the power. The media presence is relentless and exhilarating. Journalists from top financial networks clamor for exclusive quotes, thrusting digital recorders toward me. One prominent tech commentator leans in and excitedly dubs the move the greatest corporate takeover of the decade, a phrase I know will dominate tomorrow morning's headlines globally. They ask about my journey, about the sudden rise of Zenith Technologies, and about the complete destruction of my former company. I give them measured, diplomatic answers focusing entirely on our superior algorithms and flawless operational strategy. Their failure speaks volumes, entirely alone. As I navigate the crowded room with Harrison by my side, I realize that I have completely rewritten my own narrative. I am no longer the discarded girlfriend, the silent partner working in the shadows, or the naive victim of a cruel corporate betrayal. I am a towering industry leader, a wealthy, respected visionary who commands the attention of the entire technology sector. The emerald gown I wear catches the light as I move, a physical manifestation of the absolute power and wealth I have rightfully claimed. Hours pass in an intoxicating blur of champagne toasts and brilliant conversations. Eventually, the music softens, and the massive crowd begins to thin as the gala winds down. The adrenaline that has fueled me all evening starts to settle into a deep, satisfying exhaustion. Harrison leans close, his breath warm against my ear, as he asks if I am ready to leave. I nod, smiling up at him. We make our way out of the ballroom, leaving the glittering lights and lingering applause behind us. The crisp night air hits my face as we step out of the hotel, refreshing after the heat of the elite venue. A sleek black car waits for us at the curb. Harrison opens the passenger door for me, his hand resting protectively on the small of my back as I slide onto the plush leather seat. He gets in beside me, instructing the driver to head toward his family estate. The city skyline blurs past the tinted windows, a dazzling display perfectly mirroring our bright future. I lean my head against the soft leather headrest, letting out a long, contented sigh. The professional war is finally over. Zenith Technologies is secure, our market dominance is unquestionable, and my sweet revenge against those who betrayed me is flawlessly complete. However, as the city lights gradually fade into the quiet, tree-lined roads leading away from Manhattan, the atmosphere in the car shifts. The professional triumph slowly recedes, making way for the personal reality we have yet to fully navigate. The quiet hum of the engine fills the comfortable silence between us. Harrison shifts slightly in his seat, turning his body toward me. The dim streetlights passing by illuminate the sharp angles of his face, highlighting a new, intense focus in his dark eyes. He reaches across the center console and takes my hand again. Our journey together began as a strategic alliance, a shared pursuit of corporate dominance and calculated retribution. We spent countless late nights analyzing market trends, securing capital, and dismantling enemies. But somewhere along the way, amidst the chaotic server migrations and high-stakes boardroom meetings, the boundaries between professional partnership and personal connection dissolved entirely. He has been my steadfast anchor, my fiercest defender, and the one person who saw my true brilliance when everyone else overlooked me. Now, with the dust settling on our ultimate public victory, it is time to face our personal future. The car turns onto a private, winding driveway, flanked by tall oak trees, signaling our approach to his family's sprawling estate. The imposing stone structure comes into view, its windows glowing warmly in the dark night. Harrison looks down at our intertwined hands, a soft, thoughtful expression crossing his features before he meets my gaze directly. The steady confidence that guided us through the corporate takeover is replaced by a profound emotional vulnerability. "My mother called me this afternoon while you were getting ready," he says, his voice a low, intimate murmur that sends a pleasant shiver down my spine. "She saw the early press coverage about the acquisition. She is incredibly eager to host us." I look at him, my heart picking up a sudden nervous rhythm. We have spent so much time focused on destroying the past that we have barely discussed the specific details of our shared future or what comes next. "She was very specific with her wording," Harrison continues, his lips curving into a slow, breathtaking smile. "She said she cannot wait to finally formally celebrate the brilliant woman I brought into the company. And she explicitly mentioned spending time with her future daughter-in-law." The mysterious comment hangs in the quiet air of the car, heavy with promise and absolute devotion. He does not look away, waiting for my reaction as the car gently comes to a stop in front of the grand estate. I look into his dark eyes, the soft leather grounding me as the weight of his words washes over me. A genuine smile spreads across my face, full of a joy I have not felt in years. I squeeze his hand tightly, feeling the solid reassurance of his fingers intertwined with mine. "You are moving quite fast for a man who just acquired a major tech subsidiary," I tease gently, keeping my voice intimate. Harrison chuckles, a warm sound that fills the car. "I have never been one to waste time when I know exactly what I want," he replies smoothly. "And I have known what I've wanted since the day you dismantled Cameron's business model on a whiteboard." The driver discreetly opens my door, allowing the crisp night air to rush in. Harrison steps out first and offers his hand. We stand together at the base of the wide stone steps leading up to the grand estate. The massive front doors open and warm golden light spills out onto the driveway. His parents are waiting in the foyer, their expressions bright and welcoming. We walk up the steps together, true equals, stepping into a shared future. The dinner that follows is beautiful, replacing cold boardroom mechanics with genuine warmth and acceptance. 6 months pass in a blur of success. The dust has completely settled, wrapping up loose ends with a ruthless, quiet satisfaction. Zenith Technologies integrates the bankrupt assets with flawless precision. We tear down the old branding, migrate the usable databases, and erase Cameron's name from the industry registry. The media cycle moves on, cementing my reputation as a brilliant tactician. Cameron is living a reality so disconnected from his former lifestyle that it feels like a different universe. He resides in a tiny studio apartment on the far outskirts of the city. The walls are paper thin, the heating is unreliable, and his view consists of a brick wall and a rusted fire escape. There are no tailored suits, no luxury cars, and certainly no glass boardrooms. Every morning, he wakes up before dawn, puts on a stiff polyester polo shirt, and takes a 40-minute bus ride to an industrial park. Cameron is currently working a minimum-wage technical support job for a large internet provider. He sits in a gray cubicle for 8 hours a day, wearing a plastic headset and reading from a laminated script. The man who once stood on stages pitching visionary futures now asks angry customers whether they have restarted their routers. His wages are garnished under civil judgments obtained by lenders and investors. The regulatory inquiry did not produce an immediate criminal indictment. Instead, Cameron signed a cooperation agreement, surrendered records, and accepted restrictions on serving as an officer or director while the investigation remained open. He lives with the knowledge that any lie could revive the criminal exposure he once dismissed. He is erased from Chicago's executive technology community, remembered only as the founder who confused public charisma with ownership and governance. Savannah did not fare much better, though her downfall was orchestrated with elegant cruelty. Weeks before Cameron's very public collapse at the gala, Savannah saw the writing on the wall. Recognizing that the company was hemorrhaging money and Cameron was spiraling out of control, she abandoned him without a second thought. She packed her expensive bags, vacated their luxury apartment, and set her sights on a new target. Within a month, she had successfully charmed a wealthy logistics executive who was captivated by her polished appearance and fabricated tales of corporate success. Savannah moved into his penthouse and began actively pressuring him for a quick marriage, eager to secure her financial future before her past caught up with her. She thought she had escaped the blast radius of Cameron's destruction entirely untouched. She was wrong. Harrison, who possesses a memory like a steel trap and a fierce protective streak regarding those who have wronged me, decided to intervene. He used his quiet industry connections to arrange a private lunch with the senior legal counsel representing Savannah's new, wealthy target. During this discreet meeting, Harrison casually handed over a comprehensive, heavily documented dossier. The file contained Savannah's true employment history, irrefutable proof of her lack of technical skills, records of the disastrous database migration, and a detailed summary of her financial demands during her time with Cameron. The evidence was presented purely as a professional courtesy between peers, a friendly warning to protect a fellow executive's assets. The man's legal team acted immediately. 3 days before Savannah expected a lavish proposal, she was called into a sterile conference room. The executive sat at the head of the table, flanked by 4 aggressive corporate lawyers. They slid a massive, ironclad prenuptial agreement across the polished mahogany. The document was draconian, designed to protect every cent of his wealth, offering her absolutely nothing in the event of a divorce, and providing zero access to his operational capital. Savannah, realizing her long con had been thoroughly exposed, threw a massive tantrum. She angrily refused to sign the document revealing the exact toxic personality she had been hiding. The executive dumped her on the spot, ordering his security to escort her back to the penthouse to pack her belongings within the hour. With her reputation secretly poisoned among elite circles and her financial safety nets burned, Savannah had no choice but to enter the actual job market. She is now working as a front desk receptionist at a low-tier struggling marketing firm in a strip mall. She sits behind a cheap laminate counter for 9 hours a day, answering ringing phones, sorting junk mail, and fetching bitter coffee from middle managers who do not care about her glamorous past. Her designer clothes are slowly wearing out, replaced by sensible, cheap slacks. She spends her lunch breaks scrolling through social media, forced to watch the continuous soaring success of Zenith Technologies from the absolute bottom of the corporate ladder. I do not dwell on them anymore. They are irrelevant dust motes in the rear-view mirror of my life. I step out of the private elevator, my heels sinking into the plush carpet of our newly expanded headquarters. I walk past rows of brilliant engineers and dedicated staff who look up and smile genuinely as I pass. I push open the heavy glass door and step into the sleek, expansive corner office of Zenith Technologies. The space is breathtaking, designed exactly to my specifications, with clean lines, rich wood accents, and state-of-the-art technology seamlessly integrated into the architecture. I walk across the room and stand by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. I look out over the city skyline, the glass and steel towers catching the bright mid-morning sun. The view is spectacular, a physical reminder of the empire we have built. The door clicks open behind me, and I hear Harrison's familiar, steady footsteps. He steps up beside me, wrapping his arm securely around my waist and pulling me close. We look out at the city together, the undisputed rulers of our domain. I am no longer the naive programmer working in the shadows. I am not just a co-CEO. I am an industry legend. I turn away from the breathtaking view of the city and walk slowly back toward my massive mahogany desk. The polished wood surface is practically clear, save for a sleek tablet displaying the latest quarterly reports. I tap the high-resolution screen, watching the vibrant green graphs chart a steep, undeniable upward trajectory. We have not just met our aggressive projections for the fiscal year, we have entirely shattered them. Zenith Technologies has officially doubled its total revenue in a mere 6 months. Every single metric speaks to a flawless integration of the bankrupt assets we completely absorbed. Our proprietary operational frameworks, the very code I wrote late at night in a cramped apartment while Cameron was squandering our initial seed money, have now become the absolute gold standard across the entire global technology sector. Our desperate competitors are frantically trying to reverse engineer our unprecedented success, but they are miles behind our innovation. I built this massive empire entirely on my own terms. I took a horrific, deeply personal public humiliation and forged it into the ultimate corporate power move. The wealthy industry veterans who once dismissed me as a quiet accessory are now clamoring for my strategic insights. I swipe through the final pages of the financial summary, a profound sense of peace settling comfortably over my shoulders. There is no lingering anger, no residual bitterness about the painful past. The victory is absolute, leaving no room for anything but deep, highly satisfying achievement. The weak ghosts of the boardroom have been completely exorcised, replaced by the tangible reality of my undeniable success. A soft click breaks the pristine silence of the room as the heavy door handle gently turns. I set the digital tablet down on the polished wood and look up just as Harrison walks confidently into the expansive office. He moves with that familiar, effortless grace, closing the frosted glass door firmly behind him. He is wearing a beautifully tailored charcoal suit that perfectly highlights his broad shoulders, looking every bit the ruthless financial executive who bravely helped me systematically dismantle my treacherous enemies. Yet as his dark, expressive eyes quickly find mine across the wide expanse of the room, the sharp, calculating edges of his professional demeanor melt away entirely. A slow, incredibly playful smile spreads across his handsome, structured face. It is the exact same encouraging smile he gave me during our very first intense interview, the specific moment this brilliant man saw my true operational worth, when I was frantically fighting just to be heard by the board. He crosses the plush gray carpet, expertly navigating around the modern white leather furniture, until he is standing right in front of me. Without speaking a single word, he steps directly into my personal space and wraps his strong, familiar arms securely around my waist. The pleasant warmth of his solid body radiates intensely through the thin emerald silk of my blouse, instantly anchoring me to the beautiful present moment. I let out a soft, contented breath, resting my hands lightly against his broad chest, feeling the steady, deeply reassuring rhythm of his heart beating rapidly beneath his crisp, perfectly ironed dress shirt. He gently turns me around, his warm touch both commanding and incredibly tender. He looks down at me with an intense, burning admiration that immediately makes my skin tingle with electric anticipation. It is a raw, unguarded look reserved solely for me, stripping away all the impressive titles and the stiff corporate posturing. The powerful partnership we fiercely forged in the absolute fires of brutal corporate warfare has slowly, beautifully blossomed into an unbreakable, profound bond. We have actively spent agonizing months endlessly analyzing global market data, secretly strategizing massive hostile takeovers, and standing proudly, shoulder to shoulder against relentlessly aggressive competitors. Through every single high-stakes corporate negotiation and every chaotic late-night server crisis, he has faithfully been my absolute, steadfast equal. He never once selfishly tried to eclipse my rising light or unfairly claim my hard-earned victories as his own achievements. Instead, he graciously built the prominent stage and handed me the heavy microphone, standing vigilant guard while I triumphantly claimed my rightful crown. We are undoubtedly a truly formidable force in the noisy boardroom. But here, in the secluded, quiet intimacy of my personal office, we are simply a man and a woman deeply, irrevocably in love. I slowly reach up and gently trace the sharp line of his angled jaw, silently marveling at the incredible journey that successfully brought us to this exact golden moment. He leans heavily into my soft touch, closing his dark eyes briefly, as if permanently committing the wonderful sensation to his eager memory. When he finally opens them again, the charged atmosphere in the spacious room fundamentally shifts. The calm, immensely playful energy that smoothly accompanied him into the office is suddenly completely replaced by a remarkably nervous, crackling electricity. It physically radiates from him in distinctly palpable, invisible waves. The stoic man who ruthlessly negotiates billion-dollar global acquisitions without breaking a single drop of sweat is noticeably taking a slightly uneven, ragged breath. His dark, expressive eyes search mine deeply, openly, reflecting a profound, absolutely breathtaking emotional vulnerability. He slowly takes one deliberate, careful step back, reluctantly letting his large hands fall softly away from my waist. The sudden loss of his warmth makes my breath catch in my throat. He maintains unbroken eye contact, his expression conveying a million unspoken promises. The heavy silence between us stretches thick with an overwhelming sense of anticipation. He reaches a steady hand into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket, his movements slow and incredibly deliberate. He withdraws a small square black velvet box that perfectly catches the bright ambient light of the room. He holds it firmly in his large grasp, the sheer magnitude of the romantic gesture hanging heavily in the quiet, charged air. The final missing piece of my spectacular new life falls beautifully into place. He slowly opens the small black velvet box, revealing a stunning diamond ring that catches the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. The stone glitters with a pristine brilliance against the dark fabric. Harrison does not break our profound eye contact as he smoothly drops down onto one knee in the middle of the plush gray carpet. The man who ruthlessly orchestrates corporate takeovers is now looking up at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated devotion. His broad shoulders relax, and the nervous electricity that accompanied him into the room settles into a deep certainty. I feel my breath hitch in my chest, a sudden wave of overwhelming emotion threatening to spill over. We have faced down hostile boards, dismantled treacherous enemies, and built a global technology empire from the ashes of a stolen legacy. But this specific moment feels infinitely more monumental than any boardroom victory we have ever shared. He takes my left hand in his strong fingers feeling warm and gentle against my skin. The sheer weight of his gesture anchors me firmly in the present reality. I look down at his handsome face, marveling at the profound journey that has brought us to this exact position. The harsh battles and late nights were all simply the necessary steps, leading me directly to him. Harrison takes a slow, grounding breath, his thumb lightly tracing the delicate line of my knuckles. "My dad is still waiting to officially welcome his daughter-in-law to the family," Harrison says, his voice a low, incredibly intimate murmur that resonates straight through to my core. His dark eyes shine with a profound love and deep, abiding respect that I have never experienced before. He asked me again this morning if I had finally gathered the courage to ask the most brilliant woman in the technology sector to tolerate me for the rest of our lives. But this is not about my family, Madeline. This is entirely about us. It is about the absolute certainty I felt the very first time you challenged me in a meeting, refusing to back down or compromise your vision. You walked into my life and completely redefined everything I thought I wanted for my future. We have forged an unbreakable partnership in the fires of corporate warfare, standing shoulder to shoulder against people who severely underestimated your remarkable brilliance. You are my absolute equal, my fiercest defender, and the undisputed ruler of my heart. I cannot imagine navigating a single day of this life without you standing right beside me, challenging me, supporting me, and building this magnificent empire with me. Will you marry me, Madeline? The question hangs in the quiet air of my expansive corner office. I look down at the spectacular diamond ring resting in the velvet box, a physical manifestation of his unwavering commitment and our shared future. Then I slowly lift my gaze from the sparkling stone to look directly at the remarkable man kneeling before me. I look at the man who faithfully stood by my side while I systematically conquered my enemies and reclaimed my stolen dignity. My mind briefly flashes back to the cold glass boardroom where this entire journey began. I remember the sharp humiliation of being abruptly terminated, the agonizing betrayal by a man I foolishly thought loved me, and the terrifying uncertainty of stepping out into the street with absolutely nothing but my technical knowledge. I had lost a parasitic boyfriend who viewed me as nothing more than a disposable stepping stone for his own ego. Cameron had tried to erase my contributions, silence my voice, and steal the very foundation of my life's work. He had believed that I would simply fade quietly into the background, defeated and completely broken. He was entirely wrong. Instead of fading away, I channeled every single ounce of that searing pain and righteous anger into building something undeniable. I utilized my own intellect to architect a software framework that revolutionized the global market. I gained an empire that commands the respect of industry titans worldwide. I gained an unbreakable loyal partnership with a man who truly sees my immense value and constantly pushes me to reach my highest potential. And most importantly, I achieved the absolute sweetest revenge possible. Massive, undeniable, spectacular success. The woman who was cruelly discarded in that glass room no longer exists. She has been replaced by the powerful, wealthy, and loved industry legend standing here today. A profound sense of peace and absolute triumph washes over my entire being. Yes, I reply, my voice ringing out with pristine clarity and absolute joy, happy tears finally springing to my eyes. Yes, Harrison, I will absolutely marry you. A breathtaking smile breaks across Harrison's handsome face, illuminating the entire room with his relief and happiness. He quickly slips the stunning diamond ring onto my left ring finger. It fits perfectly, its weight symbolizing the permanent sealing of our incredible bond. I do not wait for him to stand up on his own. I firmly grasp the lapels of his suit jacket and eagerly pull him up from the carpet, wrapping my arms tightly around his neck. I pull him directly into a deep, passionate kiss that perfectly captures the immense joy, the shared struggles, and the absolute victory of our journey together. He wraps his strong arms securely around my waist, lifting me slightly off the floor as he kisses me back with an equal, burning intensity. The warm midday sun streams through the massive windows, bathing our embrace in a brilliant golden light. We stand together in the very center of the expansive office, the undisputed rulers of Zenith Technologies, secure in our love and our monumental achievements. The corporate wars have been won, the enemies have been entirely vanquished, and the future is a bright, limitless horizon waiting for our command. The screen slowly fades to black on a spectacular, beautiful life built entirely by my own hands. Life occasionally places us in painful situations where we are undervalued, unfairly treated, or deeply betrayed, sometimes by the very people who should protect and support us. When faced with a humiliating slap in the face or a sudden betrayal, our natural human instinct is to react with explosive, immediate anger. However, the true lesson here lies in the profound power of strategic silence and emotional discipline. Instead of wasting your precious energy trying to convince toxic people of your worth, channel that searing pain into building your own secret weapon. This could be mastering a new skill, developing a secret project, or achieving total financial independence. The journey from being a victim to becoming a victor requires a steady, step-by-step escalation of your own growth. Let your detractors continue underestimating you while you quietly and meticulously lay the groundwork for your future. When the time finally comes to reveal your hand, you will not need to shout to be heard. Your undeniable success will do all the talking for you. True justice is achieved not by destroying others, but by completely outgrowing the environment that once confined you. The ultimate payoff is never just watching your betrayers realize their monumental mistake. It is the unbreakable partnerships you forge, the profound self-respect you earn, and the spectacular empire you build with your own two hands. You stop being the underdog and become a legend in your own right. Share your own story of resilience and personal triumph in the comments below. If you found value in this lesson, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content on reclaiming your power and defining your own success.